California runs one of the biggest state prison systems in America. Around 90,000 people behind bars at any given time. That scale matters because it means the state isn't just dealing with criminals. It's managing high-risk predators who escalate, recruit, and keep causing damage even after they're caught. This video isn't about hype or headlines. It's about confirmed cases, court outcomes, and the kind of brutality that leaves entire communities changing how they live. We're counting them down. Let's go.
Hans Reiser. On the morning of September 5, 2006, Oakland officers received a call from the Thornhill Drive area about a minivan left on a quiet slope. When they opened the vehicle, they found grocery bags untouched, a wallet still on the seat, and a phone with its battery removed, placed inside the door compartment. There were no signs of a struggle. No one was there. The owner of the vehicle, Nina Reiser, 31 years old, had simply disappeared. The last person who saw her was her former husband, Hans Reiser. He was a programmer once known in the tech community and was later held in several high-security facilities in the Soledad region, including Salinas Valley State Prison. After their divorce, Reiser became fixated on custody issues, money, and the fact that his former wife had begun rebuilding her life. According to court records, psychological evaluations described him as someone obsessed with control, unable to accept being replaced, and emotionally cold when he felt he was losing power. According to his later admission, on September 3, 2006, Nina brought their 2 children to Hans's mother's home for the usual exchange. A heated argument followed. He later admitted that he placed his hands on Nina's neck during that confrontation. From that moment on, she was never seen by anyone again. Right after the disappearance, Reiser's behavior drew the attention of investigators. Neighbors reported that a few nights later, he stood outside the driveway wearing a heavy coat in hot weather while spraying water on the concrete for nearly half an hour. Inside his vehicle, officers found the passenger seat removed, the carpet stripped, and the interior still damp, as if it had been cleaned in a hurry. He claimed he was only washing the car. Investigators did not find that explanation credible. Detectives collected forensic samples and searched Reiser's property. Even without a body, prosecutors said that a chain of unexplained actions was presented to the jury. When Reiser testified on his own behalf, his conflicting statements only strengthened the case against him. On April 28, 2008, a jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree homicide. Facing the highest penalty, Reiser accepted a deal. He agreed to reveal Nina's burial site in exchange for reducing the charge to second-degree homicide. On July 7, 2008, he led officers into the Oakland Hills, where her remains were found. His final sentence was 15 years to life. Life in prison was not easy for him. Only a few months after he was incarcerated, he was attacked by other inmates and required medical care. In the years that followed, he was moved through several facilities, including the Soledad cluster that houses Salinas Valley State Prison. It is a location for some of California's most dangerous offenders, from a respected engineer to someone convicted of ending his wife's life and using her location as a bargaining chip. Hans Reiser represented a different form of cold brutality. It was a calculated detachment where a person could be erased simply for being outside his control. Robert Piernock. Around 4 in the morning on July 22, 1987, Los Angeles officers received a call about an unusual vehicle crash near Tuxford Street in the Sun Valley area. An older Cadillac had slammed into a utility pole on the roadside. When rescue crews opened the door, the smell of gasoline filled the air. In the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman who had lost her life. In the passenger seat was her 18-year-old daughter, severely injured, but still alive, and in extreme distress. They were Claire Piernock and her daughter, Natasha. At first glance, everything looked like a traffic accident caused by loss of control or intoxication. But what investigators discovered later turned the scene into one of the most calculated situations they had encountered. The interior of the vehicle had been soaked in gasoline. Under the car, technicians found an explosive device attached to the fuel tank. It was a mechanism that could have turned the car into a massive fire, wiping out all evidence if it had ignited. The device did not go off, and that failure revealed everything. Just one day earlier, Natasha had told friends that her father, Robert Piernock, had threatened her life. Piernock was an engineer familiar with explosives. He was separated from Claire and preparing for a divorce. If the divorce went through, he would receive only a small portion of the assets. But if Claire died in an apparent accident, he could gain full insurance benefits and a fortune worth several $1,000,000. According to Natasha's later testimony and investigative files, the incident that night was not an accident. It was a sequence of actions set up in advance. It included control, coercion, and placing both victims inside a vehicle prepared beforehand. When the car crashed into the pole, Piernock's plan was to create a violent event that would end everything and erase the truth. But Natasha survived. Her account destroyed the scenario her father had constructed. Piernock was arrested soon after and brought to trial in a tense, lengthy proceeding. In the courtroom, he showed no remorse. Instead, he became aggressive, shouting, interrupting, and even charging toward a prosecutor in anger. Court officers had to restrain him immediately. When the verdict was delivered, he was handcuffed and gagged so the hearing could continue. He received a life sentence without parole for taking his wife's life and for attempting to take his daughter's life. Even after entering prison, his danger level did not stop. According to prosecutors, he tried to hire people from inside the facility to target his own daughter and her attorney. That plot resulted in additional sentences. He was later placed among the high-risk inmates in California's maximum security system, including Salinas Valley State Prison. That unit houses individuals considered beyond rehabilitation and consistently prone to violence. He died in custody in 2021. But the case of a husband and father willing to turn his own family into a staged accident for control and money remains one of the most chilling examples of calculated brutality in California's history. Andrew Levi Hammond. Around 10 at night on September 28, 2020, the ShotSpotter system in Fresno detected a series of loud pops near Chestnut and Belmont. Officers arrived within minutes. On a dark and empty street, they found a vehicle sitting strangely still. Inside, 41-year-old Fernando Gonzalez was discovered in critical condition and later passed away at a local hospital. Before the incident, Gonzalez was said to have attended a prayer gathering with family. No one imagined that his drive home from a spiritual moment would end in tragedy. At first, this appeared to be a random shooting with no gang ties and no message. In reality, it became the starting point of a pattern that was quietly forming. The name investigators quickly focused on was Andrew Levi Hammond. He had prior convictions for vehicle theft and assault. Hammond was not well known. He was not a leader. He was not tied to any major criminal groups. His danger came from something else. It was an impulsive personality, quick to lose control, and extreme in his reactions. 2 years later, on the night of October 21st, 2022, Hammond became involved in a dispute with 47-year-old Stephen Rice. According to investigative records, the argument was over $20, a number so small that it felt absurd compared to the outcome. The fight escalated. Rice tried to get away and climbed over a neighbor's fence, but collapsed only minutes later. For investigators, this was no coincidence. It was the sign of someone willing to use violence when his ego was challenged. Only 12 days later, on November 2nd, 2022, officers were asked to conduct a welfare check at a home near North Anna Street. Inside, they found 39-year-old Brandon Munoz deceased. A witness in the area gave investigators one name directly. That name was Hammond. It became the final link that tied all three incidents together. Andrew Levi Hammond was arrested shortly afterward. When faced with the charges, he claimed every incident was self-defense. But the jury saw a different pattern. Prosecutors said the evidence pointed to violent acts triggered by anger and the smallest disputes. In 2024, Hammond received 3 life sentences without parole, along with 75 years to life for weapon-related enhancements. After sentencing, he was transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison. It is a facility that houses some of California's most volatile and difficult-to-manage inmates. The story of Andrew Levi Hammond is not about elaborate planning. It is about a man who allowed rage to lead the way. And once control disappeared, the consequences became irreversible. Roy Charles Waller. One quiet night in the mid-1990s, inside a Northern California apartment complex, a young woman closed her door, set her bag on a chair, and prepared to sleep. Everything looked normal. But in what should have been a safe space, an intruder slipped inside. By the time the victim realized another person was there, every escape route had already been controlled. That intruder was Roy Charles Waller, later known to investigators as the NorCal Rapist. For more than 15 years, from the early 1990s through 2006, Waller entered the homes of victims at night. He targeted women who were sleeping or going about their routines inside their own apartments. Once inside, he restrained the victims and carried out a series of severe offenses involving sexual assault and physical violence. He also searched the apartments, taking money and valuables as a method of complete control. In several cases, he forced victims to withdraw money at an ATM. In others, he stole personal items as trophies. There were incidents where he restrained 2 women at the same time inside a single home, turning their living space into a nightmare that lasted for hours. Waller's attacks stretched across at least 6 Northern California counties. They included Sonoma, Solano, Contra Costa, Yolo, Butte, and Sacramento. Many victims were young women living alone, people who believed a locked door could protect them from the outside world. His danger was not only the violence itself, it was the way he shattered the very idea of safety inside a person's own home. Ironically, during the daytime, Roy Charles Waller presented himself as a model citizen. He worked at the University of California, Berkeley, as a safety specialist for more than 2 decades. Someone tasked with protecting others was the same person spreading fear in the dark. In 2018, through genetic genealogy and family database analysis, investigators followed DNA leads that finally pointed to Waller. He was arrested on his way to work. During his 2020 trial, Waller was convicted of 46 counts. They included sexual assault, kidnapping, and unlawful entry. His final sentence was 897 years to life. It remains one of the heaviest penalties ever issued in California. After sentencing, Waller was placed in the state's high-security prison system. His name appears among inmates associated with facilities such as Salinas Valley State Prison. These are institutions reserved for individuals society cannot trust ever again. Anthony McKnight. On a late September morning in 1985, near downtown Oakland, residents found the body of a young woman behind an empty building. There had been no calls for help the night before. No witnesses. No suspect. Only a name entered into the file. She was 22-year-old Betty Stewart. 1 week later, another victim was found near an elementary school. Then another. Within a few months, Oakland was living under an invisible fear. The person behind that series of crimes was Anthony McKnight. He was a former Navy serviceman who appeared to live a normal life with a wife and children. But behind that image was someone with a history of attacks against women from years earlier. Over time, he slipped into a pattern of violence that kept escalating. Beyond the victims who lost their lives, at least 5 other women survived encounters with McKnight between late 1985 and early 1986. Some were found with severe injuries, but were still able to describe the attacker. They told officers he was cold, deliberate, and showed no hesitation when confronting them. From those descriptions, investigators narrowed their focus. On January 24, 1986, Anthony McKnight was arrested. The following year, he was convicted of multiple counts, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted homicide. He received a 63-year sentence and was sent to Salinas Valley State Prison, one of California's most violent facilities. But the story did not end there. More than a decade later, DNA technology advanced. Investigators compared McKnight's DNA profile with several unsolved Oakland cases. The results revealed a disturbing truth. McKnight had been linked to 5 homicides from 1985. One of those victims was a 13-year-old girl. The 2008 trial ended any remaining doubt. McKnight was sentenced to death. He became one of the most notorious offenders ever held in California. He was later moved to San Quentin State Prison, the state's harshest death row. In 2019, Anthony McKnight died inside his cell. There was no confession and no record of remorse. Only one cold reality remained. For years, a predator walked among the community unnoticed until the DNA collected inside a prison finally brought everything into the light. Terry Childs. On a summer afternoon in 1985, in the wooded area near Scotts Valley in Santa Cruz County, a hiker discovered the body of a 17-year-old girl only a short distance from the main road. She was Lois Jeanine Segala. There was no wallet and no message, only silence, and a scene that immediately told investigators this was not an accident. Several witnesses later recalled seeing Segala enter a dark-colored Ford Mustang the day before she disappeared. That car belonged to a 29-year-old man living nearby. His name was Terry Childs. Childs was not a typical citizen. He struggled with drug use, drifted between places, had a history of violence, and often associated with offenders around the Northern California coast. But investigators focused on him for reasons beyond his record. Evidence, witness accounts, and shell casings found at the scene began aligning in a way they could not ignore. In 1987, Terry Childs was convicted of taking Janine's life and received a life sentence. He entered the California prison system and was later moved through some of the state's most notorious facilities. That path included Corcoran and then Pelican Bay, which houses some of the most dangerous inmates in California. And it was inside those walls, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in isolation, that Childs made a stunning offer. He began confessing to a series of additional homicides from the late 1970s and early 1980s. His claims stretched from Santa Cruz to Cupertino and even into Nevada. Some of those cases involved young women who had been missing for decades. Many were cold files that investigators had nearly given up on. During interviews, Childs described locations that only the person responsible would know. He acknowledged violent acts and said he could not sleep because he was haunted by memories and shadows from his past. Those statements led to more trials. Childs received additional life sentences stacked on top of one another, with no chance of parole. He was eventually transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison. It is a place reserved for individuals considered a permanent threat to the public. Inside SVSP, Terry Childs had no path to freedom and no future outside concrete walls and razor wire. He lived out his remaining years surrounded by the consequences of the crimes he admitted to. On February 11, 2023, Terry Childs died inside Salinas Valley State Prison. There was no obituary and no final tribute. Only a brief notice stating that a serial offender had died inside the facility that held him for the rest of his life. But for many families of the victims, the pain he caused never truly ended. Antron Big Lurch Singleton. On the afternoon of April 10, 2002 in East Los Angeles, a woman looked out from her apartment window and froze. On the narrow street below, a large man was walking without clothes, covered in dark stains, moving as if unaware of where he was. Her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. She called the police immediately, then ran to check the neighboring apartment. That apartment belonged to 21-year-old Tynesha Isais, and inside it, a tragedy had taken place that could never be undone. The man on the street was not a stranger without a name. He was Antron Singleton, known in underground music as Big Lurch. He performed horrorcore rap, often writing about the darkest corners of the human mind. Ironically, elements once found only in his lyrics had now emerged in real life. A few years earlier, Singleton had survived a serious car accident that left him with chronic pain. He relied heavily on pain medication, then moved into using PCP. It is a drug known for intense hallucinations and loss of control. On the day of the incident, several people inside the apartment had reportedly used the substance together. Singleton later claimed he remembered nothing from that period of time, but forensic findings did not allow the case to remain in uncertainty. Examiners discovered that part of Tynesha's lung was missing, and biological samples taken from Singleton matched the evidence. That detail, presented in court strictly as scientific proof, led the media to label him with a chilling nickname. They called him the Cannibal Rapper. During the trial, the defense argued that Singleton was in a drug-induced psychosis, but under California law, voluntary drug use cannot be used as a legal excuse to avoid responsibility. The jury deliberated for less than 1 hour before reaching a verdict. On November 7, 2003, Antron Big Lurch Singleton received life without the possibility of parole. He also received a second life sentence for causing severe bodily injury to the victim. In the years that followed, he was held in several high-security institutions before being listed among the inmates housed at Salinas Valley State Prison. That facility is known for holding individuals considered a permanent threat to public safety. Even from behind bars, Singleton occasionally appeared indirectly through podcasts, letters, and interviews, insisting he had been pulled into a tragedy rather than causing it. But for the family of Tynesha Isais, and for those who witnessed that horrifying afternoon, one truth remains. Not everything is just a lyric, and some nightmares, once they enter real life, leave scars that never heal. Joseph Hyungmin, Joe Son. On the night of December 24, 1990, in Huntington Beach, California, Christmas lights glowed in the windows, and music drifted from homes where families gathered. Outside in a dim parking lot, a 19-year-old woman walked her dog back toward her apartment, just as she had many nights before. A simple question rose from behind her. "Can you tell me how to get somewhere?" The man asking that question was Joseph Hyungmin's son. No one could have guessed that this moment would lead to hours of terror for the victim. It later became one of the most disturbing cases in California's legal history. Son, along with a friend from his high school years, restrained the young woman and used force and weapons to control her. For hours, they moved her through different locations, repeatedly threatening her life. Although many charges related to sexual assault could not be filed because the statute of limitations had expired, the court concluded that the events of that night amounted to prolonged torture. It involved severe violations and left lasting trauma. At the height of her fear, Sun staged a mock execution. It turned her Christmas Eve into the most terrifying night she would ever endure. Before leaving, he delivered one sentence: "It's Christmas. This is your lucky day." Then he vanished. For nearly 18 years, the case slipped into the background. It became a cold file buried deep within police archives. Few could have imagined that during that time, Joe Sun appeared on television. He played a henchman in the blockbuster comedy Austin Powers. He stepped into MMA arenas, presenting himself as a violent, imposing fighter. A man who had devastated someone's life now stood under bright lights. That changed in 2008 when Sun was arrested for a minor vandalism charge. Per procedure, officers collected his DNA. Soon after, an investigator made a single phone call. His DNA matched the Christmas Eve case from 1990. During the 2011 trial, the victim stood before him and recounted every detail of that night. The jury found Sun guilty of torture, a charge with no statute of limitations, and sentenced him to life in prison. But Joe Sun did not stop there. Only 1 month after entering the California prison system, while housed in the reception center at Wasco State Prison, his cellmate was found deceased. Forensic examiners determined the cause to be trauma from force. There were only 2 people in the cell: the victim and Joe Sun. In 2017, he received an additional 27 years for killing his cellmate. That sentence was stacked onto his existing life term. For a period of time, Sun was listed as an inmate at Salinas Valley State Prison. The facility houses people considered long-term threats to society. A man who once stood in the spotlight and appeared on screen now lives permanently behind concrete and steel. The story of Joe Sun is a distorted paradox. Fame, sports, and entertainment could not erase the truth. On a distant Christmas Eve, he shattered another person's peace, and he never truly stopped afterward. Moises Meraz Espinoza. On a February morning in 2011, officers entered a small apartment in Maywood in Los Angeles County and immediately sensed something was wrong. No voices, no movement, no sign of daily life. The only sound in the entire unit was the steady hum of a freezer in the kitchen. When they opened it for inspection, what they found inside transformed a routine welfare check into one of the most disturbing cases the area had ever seen. The resident of the apartment was 42-year-old Amelia Espinoza, the mother of 18-year-old Moises Meraz Espinoza, who lived with her. Tension between them had existed for years. Neighbors said Amelia seemed anxious whenever she spoke about her son. There were constant arguments, late nights when Moises returned home in an unstable mood, and an atmosphere that felt like something terrible was simply waiting for the right moment. According to forensic findings, Amelia had lost her life several days earlier. After the incident, Moises did not flee. He stayed inside the apartment and tried to hide what happened. Then, nearly a week later, he walked into the Huntington Park police station and calmly turned himself in. He directed officers to the place where he had concealed her remains in the kitchen. What unsettled investigators even more was what they found inside the apartment. There was a book describing human sacrifice. After his arrest, Moises also displayed a tattoo of an inverted cross behind his ear. Prosecutors argued that this was not a spontaneous act. They said it reflected a distorted belief system driven by dark obsessions and a desire for absolute control. In 2013, Meraz Espinoza was convicted of first-degree homicide and received a sentence of 25 years to life. A judge described the case as one of the most disturbing he had ever seen from the bench. If the story ended there, It would have been enough to place him among the most violent offenders. But he did not stop. At Salinas Valley State Prison, a facility known for housing the most dangerous individuals in California, Miraz Espinoza soon became a recurring name in security reports. On the night of February 4th, 2023, only minutes after cell doors were locked, he attacked his cellmate. The injuries were severe enough that the victim required emergency treatment. Less than 1 year later, on November 25th, 2024, during outdoor yard time, he walked straight toward another inmate and assaulted him in full view of the crowd and surveillance cameras. In 2025, a Monterey County jury convicted him of 2 additional counts of aggravated assault by an inmate serving a life sentence. Legally, those convictions closed nearly every door to any future beyond prison walls. From a quiet apartment in Maywood to the concrete corridors of Salinas Valley State Prison, Moises Miraz Espinoza became more than a convicted murderer. He became a reminder of something darker. When that darkness grows deep enough inside a person, even steel bars cannot contain where it spreads. Hossein Nayeri. In October of 2012, in a quiet neighborhood in Newport Beach, California, 2 acquaintances of Hossein Nayeri stepped outside a home without realizing it would be the last normal moment of their lives. Only minutes later, they were confronted, restrained, and blindfolded. There were no screams, no witnesses, no sign to anyone on the street that a nightmare had already begun behind closed walls. What made this case stand out was not only the abduction, it was the way Nayeri used the victims as tools in a prolonged and calculated campaign of torture. Nayeri believed that one of the victims was hiding millions of dollars in the Mojave Desert. Instead of seeking truth, he chose control. He forced obedience. He demanded answers, true or imagined, driven by his fixation on power. The victims were taken dozens of miles into a remote desert area. There, they faced not only physical danger, but a complete loss of dignity and humanity. They were humiliated and terrified in a situation shaped entirely by someone obsessed with dominance. Because the victims in this case are protected, their names will not be mentioned. And due to YouTube content limitations, we cannot describe the full severity of the acts involved. Anyone who wishes to understand the complete details can research public records and court documents available outside this platform. When investigators began closing in, Nayeri did not panic. He left the United States and fled to Iran, behaving as though he had outsmarted everyone. But his wife, the person who first recognized who he truly was, cooperated with authorities. Her cooperation helped lead him out of hiding. At the Prague airport, he was arrested. But even steel bars were not enough to restrain him. In 2016, while awaiting trial at the Orange County Jail, Hossein Nayeri and 2 other inmates carried out a bold escape. They cut through metal bars, crawled through plumbing spaces, climbed onto the roof, and disappeared into the night. The most unsettling moment came from the security footage that showed Nayeri giving a thumbs-up gesture, as if taunting the entire system. He was eventually captured again. In 2020, Nayeri received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with an additional term. Prosecutors said he was not simply a dangerous offender. He was someone driven by power, domination, and the thrill of controlling others completely. Today, he is held at Salinas Valley State Prison, a facility reserved for individuals considered permanent threats to society. There, behind layers of steel and concrete, Hossein Nayeri is more than someone serving time. He is a chilling reminder that when intelligence loses all moral boundaries, it can become one of the most dangerous weapons a person can possess. Joseph the Animal Barboza, on July 15, 1970, in Santa Rosa, California, a man walking near a wooded area found a car abandoned by the roadside. The door was open, and there were signs of a struggle inside. The car belonged to Clay Wilson. Neighbors had seen him for the last time on the previous evening. When investigators arrived, they immediately believed this was a targeted incident. A clear suspect appeared right away. It was Joseph the Animal Barboza, who was living under a new identity in the FBI Witness Protection Program. Before he ever showed up in California, Barboza had already carried out a long list of violent acts on the East Coast. In 1953, he took part in a breakout that investigators later described as a violent escape. He overpowered a guard, stole a car, and sped through Boston, injuring people along the way until he was caught again in less than 1 day. It was an early sign of how willing he was to use force. By the 1960s, Barboza had become an enforcer for the Patriarca organization. One of the most noted incidents came on August 4, 1964. Harold Hannon and Wilfred Delaney lost their lives only a few hours apart. That night became one of the clearest examples of Barboza acting with sharp, rapid decisions. The most significant case linked to him happened on March 12, 1965. Edward "Teddy" Deegan was found deceased in an alley in Chelsea. According to later court records, Barboza was present at the scene and fired the weapon. When he was arrested in 1966 for carrying an illegal firearm, he began cooperating with the FBI. In court, he claimed 6 other men were responsible. His testimony led to 4 death sentences and 2 life sentences. Years later, newly released documents showed that all 60 men were innocent. It became one of the clearest examples of how dangerous Barboza was. He did not only end lives, he also sent innocent people toward death sentences to save himself. Between 1964 and 1966, records list at least 11 victims connected to him. Most of them were rivals, people who owed money, or individuals who crossed his path at the wrong moment. The Clay Wilson case was the reason Barboza was sent to Folsom State Prison. He pled guilty to second-degree homicide and received a 5-year sentence. Inside Folsom, Barboza showed no signs of remorse. He spent his time writing accounts of the violent acts he carried out in Boston, treating them as if they were a record of his criminal career. Nothing in his file suggests he asked for leniency because of regret or any desire to reform. On October 30, 1975, Barboza was released from Folsom. Less than 4 months later, on the morning of February 11, 1976, he was ambushed and shot with a shotgun outside his residence in San Francisco. For many investigators who had followed him for years, it was the moment when Barboza finally faced the consequences of the life he had created. James Marlowe and Cynthia Kaufman, the Folsom Wolf killer couple. On November 12, 1986, in Huntington Beach, California, employees at a laundromat reported that 19-year-old Linnell Murray never came back after her break. Her jacket, keys, and wallet were still on the counter. Her car was gone. When officers checked banking records, they found that Linnell's card was being used repeatedly in several cities. ATM cameras showed a man with heavy tattoos staring straight into the lens. A woman stood close behind him, watching the street. Officers recognized the man immediately. It was James Gregory Marlowe, a former inmate at Folsom State Prison, who was known inside by the name Folsom Wolf. Before 1986, Marlowe had a long history of violence. He grew up around fights, shootings, and meth use, then joined a biker group with white supremacist views. During his time at Folsom, both inmates and officers reported that he had extreme violent tendencies. He often bragged about attacking people of color to maintain his status. The name Folsom Wolf was not a playful nickname. It was the way Marlowe described his most violent state of mind. Cynthia Kaufman met Marlowe after he left prison. Their relationship quickly turned into one controlled by fear. Kaufman later said Marlowe beat her, tied her up, and used prolonged violence to keep control, always with severe threats. But records also show Kaufman was not simply forced into everything. She drove victims to other locations, used stolen credit cards, pawned stolen items, and actively helped conceal what happened. The jury concluded she was not fully controlled. She was a knowing participant. The series of crimes lasted through the final weeks of 1986. Sandra Neary, 32 years old, never returned home after using an ATM in Costa Mesa. Pamela Simmons, 35 years old, was taken in Arizona. Corinna Novus, 20 years old, was forced from a mall parking lot, held while her PIN was taken, then found deceased in a shallow grave in Fontana. The pattern repeated in every case. They approached a young woman who was alone or at work, threatened her with a firearm, forced her to give her PIN, withdrew money across different towns, and made sure no one survived. After Linnell Murray disappeared, her card was used for withdrawals, purchases, and motel rentals. Those records triggered an intense pursuit. On November 14, 1986. Officers captured Marlowe and Kaufman in Big Bear. They were walking in the cold, wearing only swimwear, which showed days of meth use and frantic flight. Marlowe and Kaufman received death sentences in separate trials in San Bernardino and Orange County. Prosecutors described them as a pair who moved across state lines, targeted vulnerable victims, acted fast, and left no one alive. For investigators, the 1986 cases proved that the Folsom Wolf did not stay behind the walls of Folsom. It was the violent mindset Marlowe brought into the outside world, and Kaufman became his partner in those crimes. David Carpenter, the trailside killer. On the morning of August 19, 1979, near Mount Tamalpais in Marin County, a group of hikers found the body of a woman beside a trail. Her backpack was untouched, and her food was still sealed, which told investigators she had been taken by surprise. The victim was identified as 44-year-old Etta Kane. Officers understood right away that this was not an isolated act. The location of the body, the distance from the main trail, and the way the attacker moved her all pointed to a calculated approach. When the name David Carpenter surfaced, his history captured investigators' attention immediately. In 1960, Carpenter attacked a woman in the middle of San Francisco with severe force, leaving her critically injured. A military police officer happened to pass by and fired to stop him, saving the victim's life. Carpenter received a 14-year sentence. After his release in 1969, he escalated again only months later. Records describe a series of violent acts against women, walking alone, and an unlawful entry into the home of Lucille Davis, where he tied her hands and took her car. He later abducted a 21-year-old woman and her 16-month-old son, forced her to drive toward Oakdale, then left the two on the roadside. Carpenter was arrested in 1970. In that same year, he sawed through window bars and escaped with 5 other inmates. They stayed on the run for 2 weeks before being caught again. He entered the California prison system, including time at Folsom State Prison. Folsom records noted violent tendencies, high manipulation skills, and a diagnosis consistent with antisocial personality disorder. Despite that, he was paroled in 1977 and fully released in 1979. Only months after leaving the system, the trail attacks began. 23-year-old Mary Frances Bennett disappeared from Land's End in October 1979. Many years later, DNA confirmed Carpenter was responsible. In 1980, Barbara Schwartz and Ann Alderson were attacked at Mount Tamalpais. Each victim was forced into a position that gave Carpenter full control, showing that the attacker had experience striking fast and with precision. A major turning point came on March 11, 1981. Ellen Hansen and her boyfriend, Stephen Hertel, were walking in Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park when Carpenter approached. He ordered Ellen to walk with him. When she refused, he opened fire. Ellen lost her life. Stephen survived and provided officers with a description that matched Carpenter. In May 1981, 20-year-old Heather Skaggs, a co-worker of Carpenter, disappeared after saying she was meeting him to buy a car. Her body was found weeks later in Big Basin, struck by a round from a .38 caliber weapon that forensic analysis linked back to Carpenter. A search of his home and car uncovered rounds, casings, and evidence that tied directly to several scenes. Carpenter was arrested and received 2 death sentences in trials held in 1984 and 1988. Investigators later said the pattern showed one clear reality. Even after spending time at a high-security prison like Folsom for severe attacks and for escaping custody, Carpenter continued to escalate and became one of the most dangerous trailside offenders in California history. Thor Nys Christiansen. On the morning of January 20th, 1977, in Refugio Canyon in Santa Barbara County, a patrol team found the body of a young woman hidden in thin woodland, only a short distance from the paved road. There were no signs she tried to flee, and no long drag marks. The victim was 21-year-old Jacqueline Rook, a UCSB student who had gone missing 2 months earlier while moving around the Isla Vista area. The attacker used a small-caliber firearm at extremely close range. The quick, precise nature of the act led officers to believe this was not impulsive. Weeks later, another young woman disappeared. 19-year-old Mary Ann Saris, who had long hair and a build similar to Rook, was last seen in the same Isla Vista area. By January 1977, a third victim, Patricia Laney, also a UCSB student, went missing while handing out flyers for the two earlier cases. Her body was found the next day in Refugio Canyon. A photograph showing all three victims made investigators pause. Their hairstyles, their builds, their clothing, all nearly identical. Isla Vista, known for students walking and hitchhiking, changed immediately. Hitchhiking was put under strict warning, and many female students would not walk after sunset. The person behind these acts was 19-year-old Thor Nils Christiansen from Solvang. He had dropped out of school, lived apart from his family, and spent most of his time driving around Isla Vista and Goleta. His pattern was clear. He approached women seeking rides, drove them to isolated areas, assaulted them, then used a point-blank shot from a .22 caliber firearm. He left the bodies in canyons or remote drainage areas. While Santa Barbara was still searching for answers, Christiansen moved to Los Angeles. On April 18, 1979, in West Hollywood, he offered 24-year-old Lydia Preston a ride. When she turned her head toward the window, he drew a gun and fired a shot that dropped her instantly. In a survival reaction, Lydia pushed the door open, fell from the car, and crawled to the roadside. She lived after emergency surgery. 3 months later, on July 11, 1979, Lydia walked into a bar in Hollywood and froze. The man who shot her was sitting in front of her. She stepped out, called officers, and Christiansen was taken into custody within minutes. A search of his home and car revealed evidence linking him to the 3 Isla Vista cases and to the death of 22-year-old Laura Benjamin in Los Angeles. In 1980, Christiansen received multiple life sentences. Later that year, he was transferred to Folsom State Prison, where inmates considered too dangerous for other facilities were often housed. On March 30, 1981, only months after arriving at Folsom, Christiansen was fatally stabbed in the chest by another inmate while walking in the exercise yard. He tried to move toward a group of officers before collapsing. At 23 years old, the man who once forced Isla Vista to change its daily habits lost his life not through the court system, but through the violence that existed inside Folsom itself. Charles Jackson, the East Bay Slayer. On the morning of January 5, 1982, in the Montclair woods of Oakland, a park employee found the body of a woman lying several dozen yards off the trail. Her clothing had been pulled out of place, and there were signs of a brief struggle. The victim was 44-year-old Joan Marie Stewart, a biology professor at City College, who had gone missing 2 days earlier while out for a run near her home. Not far from her body, officers collected an unusual detail. It was a half-eaten piece of Canadian bacon. That was the moment they realized this incident was not isolated. It was the first trace tied to the person the press would later call the East Bay Slayer. That person was 44-year-old Charles Jackson. He lived only minutes from the scene. His record stretched back to the 1950s and included theft, physical attacks, assaults on women, and severe acts against vulnerable individuals. He went to prison, then was released, again and again. A prosecutor later said, "The system knew who he was, but every time he walked out, someone else lost their life." Jackson worked as a gardener and handyman. He drove an old truck and knocked on doors, asking if anyone needed small jobs done. If the homeowner was a woman living alone, that moment became the most dangerous. From 1975 through 1982, a series of cases spread across the East Bay kept residents on edge. One incident haunted Contra Costa for years. An 11-year-old girl lost her life only minutes after playing with her cousin. Her family did not know who the attacker was until DNA technology emerged decades later. At the time, investigators saw no clear connection. The neighborhoods were different, the ages varied, the methods were not identical. But when the map was reviewed, one thing stood out. From Oakland to Moraga, from Rock Ridge to Albany Hill, the dots marking the victims almost formed the travel pattern of the same person. The Joan Stewart case became the turning point. The piece of Canadian bacon matched what Jackson's mother said she packed for him every morning. A witness saw a suspicious truck in Montclair at the time Joan went missing and wrote down the plate number. The plate belonged to Charles Jackson. He was arrested on January 8, 1982, and the following year received a life sentence. But the most disturbing truth appeared only after he was already inside Folsom State Prison from within Folsom. Jackson's DNA was matched to multiple cold cases. One by one, they aligned. Higginbotham, Johnson, the 11-year-old girl, the Vila couple, Grunswijk, Slocum. At least 8 victims, possibly more. On February 15, 2002, Jackson died in his Folsom cell from cardiac arrest. When he died, the full picture became clear. A handyman with an old truck had turned the East Bay into a hunting ground. Only behind Folsom's bars did investigators finally assemble the truth. Angelo Buono Jr., the Hillside Strangler. On the night of October 18, 1977, along a hillside overlooking the Ventura Freeway in Los Angeles, a driver pulled over after noticing something unusual near the roadside. As he approached, he discovered the body of a young woman who had lost her life through strangulation. Her name was 19-year-old Yolanda Washington. Officers initially believed this was a single incident, but in the 4 months that followed, 9 more young women were found on hillsides around the city, all in similar conditions. The press called the offender the Hillside Strangler, but later evidence showed there were 2 offenders: Angelo Buono Jr., who owned an upholstery shop in Glendale, and his cousin Kenneth Bianchi. In the small house next to the shop, Buono, a man in his 40s with a long history of domestic violence allegations, was the one directing everything. Buono grew up in a violent environment, dropped out of school, and was known for years of attacks against women. He treated women as objects and controlled the people who lived with him. When Bianchi moved in during 1976, Buono's aggression became the pattern that pushed both men into more severe acts. Their method, as outlined in investigative files, followed a clear structure. They impersonated law enforcement officers and approached young women on the street. They used an authoritative tone and showed fake badges to remove suspicion. They forced the women into a car and drove them to Buono's upholstery shop in Glendale. They carried out the attack, caused the victim to lose consciousness, then left the body on hillsides around Los Angeles. Some of the victims were very young. Some had just stepped off a bus or were walking home from school. Some were students or women heading to evening jobs. Because the victims came from many different backgrounds, fear spread widely. From Hollywood to Eagle Rock, women avoided going outside after dark. Everything changed in early 1979 when Bianchi was arrested in Washington state for 2 homicides with a nearly identical pattern. To avoid a death sentence, Bianchi pled guilty and identified Buono as his partner, saying Buono often chose the victims. The case against Buono became one of the longest trials in California history. Prosecutors argued that Buono was the older figure, the one in control, and the person responsible for directing the acts. When the court handed down a life sentence without parole, the judge stated that Buono's level of danger could not be underestimated. After sentencing, Buono was sent to Folsom State Prison. Inside Folsom, he rarely left his cell because he understood that his crimes were despised in the prison environment. He was later transferred to another institution, where he continued serving his sentence until he died from heart disease. In official records, Angelo Buono appears as the model of a calculated violent offender. He did not lose control. He did not act impulsively. For years, he held deep contempt toward women, and in only 4 months, he pushed Los Angeles into a fear that many were too shaken to describe aloud. Charles Manson. In the early morning of August 9th, 1969, at 10050 Cielo Drive in Benedict Canyon in Los Angeles, an LAPD team stepped into a quiet hillside home and found 5 victims. One of them was a pregnant actress who was close to her due date. There were no signs of forced entry, no calls to 911. The words left on the walls showed that this was not about money or personal revenge. It was an attempt to send an extreme message. Only a few hours later, a couple in Los Feliz were killed in a similar way. 2 incidents within 24 hours in 2 different neighborhoods with victims who had no connection to each other. But they shared one thing in common. The person directing both attacks never set foot inside either crime scene. That person was Charles Manson. Before his name shook the entire country, he had spent most of his life in reform schools and federal prisons for theft, assault, and fraud. When he was released in 1967, he entered the heart of the hippie movement and quickly gathered around him young drifters, runaway girls, and people searching for meaning. They called him Charlie. Manson called them the family and turned them into tools. In his private worldview, America was heading toward a chaotic collapse he called helter-skelter. In that belief, the violent acts would push communities into confrontation and disorder. He did not need to attack anyone himself. He gave orders, divided groups, selected targets, and guided each step. His followers believed they were carrying out a mission. On the night of August 8th into the early hours of August 9th, 4 family members went to Cielo Drive under Manson's instructions to send a signal, as he described it. On the following night, August 9th into August 10th, Manson drove to the home of the LaBianca couple, pointed out the house and the victim's location, then returned to the car and left the rest to his followers. What happened afterward left Los Angeles in deep fear for months. The most disturbing part was this: Manson did not need to touch the victims. He carried out the acts through the hands of people who believed in him. By the end of 1969, a series of jailhouse statements unlocked the entire case. In a trial that lasted nearly 2 years, prosecutors described Manson as a manipulator who controlled others to act for him. He received a death sentence. When California overturned the death penalty in 1972, his sentence became life in prison. That same year, Manson was transferred to Folsom State Prison. He was placed in maximum security, reserved for inmates who could not be housed with the general population because of danger or notoriety. In the years that followed, he repeatedly faced discipline for possessing improvised weapons, narcotics, and for trying to influence other inmates, showing that his cult leader mentality never faded. Charles Manson died in 2017 at the age of 83. What remains is not a mystery, but a reminder. Violence does not always come from the person holding the weapon. Sometimes it comes from the one whose words alone can terrify an entire society. Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer. On the afternoon of September 14, 1972, in Santa Cruz in California, a 15-year-old high school student was standing at a bus stop. She changed her mind and raised her hand to hitchhike. A witness later described a dark-colored car stopping. The driver spoke gently, without pressure or urgency. She got into the car and disappeared. When officers reviewed the records, they realized she was the 3rd young woman to vanish while hitchhiking around the university area. All of them disappeared after entering the car of the same man. A man the officers already knew by sight. That man was Edmund Big Ed Kemper. He was more than 2 meters tall and weighed nearly 130 kilograms. He often spent time at a bar called the Jury Room. He joked, acted friendly, and drank with local officers. No one suspected that this gentle giant had killed his grandparents at the age of 15 and had been locked inside a maximum security psychiatric hospital. In 1969, on his 21st birthday, he was released with a note calling him stable, even though his psychological file held many warnings. Back home in Aptos, he lived with his mother in a house filled with yelling, insults, and years of contempt. Doctors later described their relationship as the real fuse. And Santa Cruz, with hundreds of young students who hitchhiked daily, became the place where he saw easy access to potential victims. Starting in May 1972, disappearances increased. 2 students hitchhiking towards Stanford never returned. Then the 15-year-old student. Then a Cabrillo College student. Then 2 UC Santa Cruz students. The pattern was clear. Young women hitchhiking were entering a car driven by someone who appeared harmless. Kemper would pretend he was lost, change direction, then drive to remote hills or coastal areas where he had full control. After the attacks, he concealed the bodies in isolated areas, making discovery nearly impossible. What seemed impossible was that during this entire period, Kemper was sitting in bars, drinking with officers who were discussing the unknown co-ed hunter. He nodded, analyzed, and even offered opinions. They found him likable, unaware that the man they were trying to catch was the one sitting beside them. On the night of April 20th, 1973, years of rage toward his mother reached the breaking point. After a severe argument, Kemper killed his mother. He then killed her friend, who had come to stay the night. The next day, he drove across state lines to Colorado and called Santa Cruz officers to confess everything. At first, they thought he was joking. Only when he described details only the offender could know did the truth become clear. The court sentenced Kemper to 8 life terms. He was placed in the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, which housed high-risk offenders. There, he became a case study. He was intelligent, calm, skilled at manipulation, but showed no genuine remorse. Edmund Kemper is still alive today. And Santa Cruz, a peaceful college town, remains tied to the name that chilled the nation: the co-ed killer. Cameron Hooker, the girl-in-the-box offender. On the afternoon of May 19, 1977, along a quiet stretch of highway in Northern California, 20-year-old Colleen Stan stood at the roadside considering the family car that had just stopped. She had already refused 2 earlier rides because they felt unsafe. The man driving this car had his wife and young child in the back seat. What Colleen did not know was that in the trunk, Cameron Hooker had prepared a sealed wooden box built to confine a person's head. There was no light and no way out. Minutes after the car pulled into a remote wooded area, Hooker pulled a knife, overpowered Colleen, and forced the headbox over her. She was taken to Red Bluff, into a small home where the Hooker family appeared to live an ordinary life. But beneath the couple's bed waited another wooden box. It was long like a drawer. Colleen was locked inside it for nearly 23 hours a day. For years, no clock, no window, only the sound of the Hookers walking above her. Months later, Hooker presented what he called a lifetime slavery contract. He forced Colleen to sign a document describing her as his property. It held no legal weight, but the psychological impact was devastating. It erased her sense that she still had any choice. To tighten control, Hooker invented a secret organization he called the Company. He told Colleen it was a trafficking network that monitored every move she made. If she ran or told anyone the truth, he said her family would be punished. Experts later described this as coercive control. It bound the victim with invisible fear, preventing escape even when the door was open. At times, to avoid suspicion from neighbors, Hooker allowed what he considered controlled freedom. Colleen cooked, cleaned, cared for the children, and at one point, even worked at a motel. She was once allowed to visit her family by bus. They noticed she was thin, cautious, and speaking strangely. But when she said she was fine, they did not know that fear of the Company stood behind her, like a shadow. Whenever Hooker felt she was gaining too much freedom, he returned her to the box under the bed. For the next 3 years, Colleen's life cycled between total darkness and short periods outside, only to perform household duties. The breaking point came from inside the Hooker family itself. When Hooker began talking about making Colleen a second wife, Janice, his long-suffering spouse, realized the situation had gone beyond anything she could contain. In 1984, Janice told Colleen that the Company did not exist. Colleen immediately left, took a bus, and went home. Janice then went to officers and gave a full account. In the 1985 trial, a forensic psychologist described the case as an unprecedented file of captivity and psychological domination in California history. Cameron Hooker received a 104-year sentence. His name later appeared among the dangerous offenders who had been housed at Folsom State Prison. He was then evaluated for classification as a sexually violent predator, a status that could keep him confined indefinitely in a high-security environment. For many experts, Hooker was not only a kidnapper, he was one of the clearest examples of a form of violence that only a prison could hold back. A violence that did not rely on knives, but on a box and a threat strong enough to restrain another human being for 7 years. Charles Ng. On June 2, 1985, in South San Francisco, an employee at South City Lumber called officers after seeing an Asian man attempt to steal a $75 vise. When officers arrived, an older man who had come with him sat waiting in the car, calm and unconcerned. Inside their vehicle was a firearm with an illegal suppressor and documents tied to several missing persons from Northern California. The older man was Leonard Lake. During questioning, Lake asked for a glass of water, drank it, and collapsed. He had hidden cyanide on his person. He died within minutes. The man who tried to steal the vice fled to Canada. Only then did officers realize they had opened the door to one of the most disturbing cases in state history. The fugitive was Charles Ng. Inside Lake's cabin in Wilseyville, investigators found something no one expected to see deep in the woods. It was a concrete bunker with a steel door, Lake's journals, videotapes, bone fragments, and freshly dug pits. In his writings, Lake called the project Operation Miranda, named after a character in the novel The Collector, where the offender believed he had the right to keep a woman as property. It was not impulsive. It was a system, a cabin to lure victims, a bunker for confinement, burial sites for concealment. From 1983 to 1985, many people disappeared. Single men, young couples, and in some cases entire families, including husbands, wives, and small children, vanished within the same afternoon. Inside the cabin, officers found personal items belonging to these people: wallets, notebooks, documents, photographs. DNA at the scene confirmed at least 11 victims. Indirect evidence suggested the true number may be higher. Ung was not forced into any of it. In letters, drawings, and videotapes, he demonstrated active involvement in the pair's criminal system. When arrested in Calgary after another shoplifting incident, Ung fought extradition for nearly 6 years. He changed lawyers repeatedly and filed challenges against courts in both Canada and California to delay the case. Once returned to the United States, Ung was classified as an extremely dangerous offender. While held at Folsom State Prison, he was caught with sharpened metal objects and escape tools. Each time he went to court, authorities transported him in a mobile steel cage to maintain safety. Ung's trial cost around $20 million, becoming one of the most expensive cases in California history. Prosecutors said it was not a typical serial homicide case. It was a structured criminal operation built through close cooperation between two offenders. In 1999, the jury found Ung guilty of 11 counts of first-degree homicide with multiple special circumstances. The court issued a death sentence. California is currently under a moratorium on executions, but Ung remains incarcerated today. He is one of the offenders the state system, which has included Folsom, continues to hold under its highest level of security. And it all began with a $75 theft. Jaime Osuna. In November of 2011, in the city of Bakersfield, police were called to a room at the El Morocco Motel. Inside, they found Yvette Pena, age 37, deceased. Investigators said the scene suggested this was not a sudden act, but the end of a long pattern of control and violence. They said the evidence indicated the victim felt fear before it was over. Jaime Osuna quickly became the focus of the investigation. At first, Osuna denied everything. From jail, he appeared on local television and spoke calmly about the case, as if it were a misunderstanding. But over time, the file grew. It included statements and physical evidence. Prosecutors also alleged there were signs he tried to intimidate and control people who might testify. In March of 2017, Osuna pleaded guilty in a deal that spared him a death sentence. 2 months later, the court sentenced him to life in prison, with no possibility of release. Yvette Pena's family asked for the sentencing date to fall on her birthday, as a way to close the case with justice for the woman they lost. For many people, that should have been the end, but Osuna's story did not end there. In March of 2019, at Corcoran State Prison in California, an inmate named Luis Romero was found deceased in a cell. Osuna, who shared the cell, was immediately identified as a suspect. Officials said the details were so serious that Osuna was placed in long-term, highly restrictive housing, a level reserved for people considered among the most dangerous, even inside prison. Prosecutors described the prison case as especially severe, and the legal process moved cautiously and slowly. At one point, the court found Osuna was not competent to stand trial. He was transferred to mandatory treatment facilities before the case could continue. What makes Jaime Osuna frightening is not only what happened outside prison. It is the fact that, according to officials, the violence did not stop when the cell door closed. Even in a tightly controlled place like Corcoran, the system still had to lock him down even further. On a list of the most dangerous inmates at Corcoran, Osuna is a cold reminder. For some people, even the harshest sentence is still not enough to end the danger they bring with them. Dana Ewell, on Easter Sunday, April 19, 1992, inside a spacious home in the Sunnyside neighborhood of Fresno, 3 members of the Ewell family were found shot to death. There were no signs of robbery, no struggle, and the scene was so clean it resembled a planned execution rather than an impulsive act. Investigators quickly realized it was a homicide that came from within the family. The only son, 21-year-old Dana Ewell, appeared on television portraying a grieving young man, speaking about his parents in a calm, almost cold tone. The investigation later revealed that if the entire family were dead, Dana would gain control of assets worth around $8 million. The The key to the case lay in a Feather AT-99mm semi-automatic firearm, a rare weapon purchased in Reseda on March 23, 1992, by Ernest Jack Ponce. He admitted buying it on behalf of Joel Radovchich, Dana's close friend. Along with the AT-9 came a Green Mountain barrel and a homemade silencer. Ballistic analysis matched the bullets and marks to those found at the Ewell residence. Ponce later led police to the site where the barrel had been buried. The kind of evidence concealment that takes weeks to plan, not minutes. While Fresno was still in mourning, Dana and Radovchich moved into the very same house that had been the crime scene, spending large amounts of cash, taking helicopter lessons, traveling, and living lavishly. Investigators observed that they used payphones and pagers to communicate, avoiding landlines. Behavior not of innocent students, but of people who believed they were being monitored. During one recorded call at a payphone, Radovchich was heard saying, "They don't have any evidence," in the confidence of a man who thought he was smarter than the investigation. The motive, the weapons trail, Ponce's testimony, and the ambush setup inside the house all came together into one picture. Dana Ewell had orchestrated and planned the murders of his parents and sister in exchange for control of the family fortune. In 1998, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, multiple victims, premeditation, and financial motive. Dana received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Radovchich received the same. Today, Dana Ewell is held in the Protective Housing Unit at California State Prison, Corcoran, a special section separated from the general population. A man who once erased his entire family for money now lives under strict control, serving a sentence with no way out. Horace Van Volts. In July 1981, in Montclair, California, a passerby discovered the body of 21-year-old Selena Keogh in the bushes near a residential area. In 1986, in Burbank, about 40 miles away, police found 22-year-old Mary Dugan inside the trunk of her own car. 2 cases, 2 different counties, with no clear link. Yet the method was the same: quiet, controlled, and leaving almost no trace. At that time, the concept of DNA analysis did not exist. Both files were placed among the unsolved cases. Nearly 40 years later, technology had advanced beyond what anyone could have imagined. In 2019, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office launched its first investigative genealogy DNA program, known as IgG. Old biological samples from both cases were uploaded to the GED Match database. The algorithm compared thousands of genetic relatives and narrowed the results to a single match: 64-year-old Horace Van Volts Jr., living in Pomona. Detectives quietly collected DNA from discarded items belonging to him, and the results matched the biological samples preserved from 1981 and 1986. In November that year, Volts was arrested. At that time, it was the first prosecution in Los Angeles County based on investigative genealogy. When his background was reviewed, another detail surfaced. Volts had been charged in 1988 in Ventura County for the killing of Jana Rowe, but was acquitted. Later, modern DNA confirmed a genetic match to Rowe's case, yet due to the double jeopardy principle, the court could not retry him. The Keogh and Dugan cases became the foundation that finally exposed him. The 2022 trial described Volts as highly calculated and disturbingly elusive, a man capable of taking 2 lives in 2 counties, then living normally for decades. In August 2022, the jury found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, multiple victims, and the crimes committed during sexual assaults. In September, the judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. On September 19, 2022, Volts was transferred to California State Prison, Corcoran, under the authority of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The agency did not disclose his housing unit, only confirming that he is serving a life without parole sentence. In June 2024, the California Supreme Court rejected his appeal, and by April 2025, he filed a federal habeas petition, a move considered little more than a formality. Horace Van Volts stands as one of the clearest examples of modern forensic evolution. Genealogy can close cases once thought forever frozen in time, 3 decades of silence. And in the end, his own old cells broke that silence, sealing his fate with a sentence that leaves no way out inside Corcoran. Efren Saldivar. In the late 1990s, the respiratory unit at Glendale Adventist Medical Center began noticing a disturbing pattern. The number of overnight deaths increased significantly whenever 29-year-old respiratory therapist Efren Saldivar was on duty. Shift logs showed his name repeatedly connected to the final hours of elderly and critically ill patients who required continuous respiratory support. No one could draw conclusions, since every chart listed natural causes. In March 1998, an anonymous call to Glendale police triggered the entire investigation. "There's an angel of death working in the hospital." Late on March 11th, Saldivar walked into the station himself and confessed to taking around 40 to 50 patients' lives using muscle relaxants, pancuronium, also known as Pavilon, and sometimes succinylcholine, drugs capable of causing respiratory paralysis when abused. Soon after, he retracted his statement once an attorney intervened. With no chemical evidence in the bodies to prove his claim, he was released. For many, that seemed like the end. For investigators, it was only the beginning. The following year, the task force reconstructed mortality curves according to work shifts, reviewing over 1,000 deaths that matched Saldivar's schedule. They obtained court approval to exhume 20 graves of deceased patients, since most other bodies had been cremated. Tissue samples were sent to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, often called the final stop, for cases with almost no evidence. In early 2001, the lab reported that 6 of the 20 samples contained Pavilon residues. It was the piece investigators had been waiting for, a compound that could not exist in the body without outside interference. In January 2001, Saldivar was arrested again and charged with 6 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. During questioning, he described killing patients as like stealing chewing gum. "You do it and forget it." The chilling remark left the interrogation room in silence. In March 2002, he pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. A second confession was read in court during sentencing. Saldivar admitted to killing more than 100 people, saying his motive was simply to make his job easier. And at trial, prosecutors listed the 6 victims, whose forensic evidence directly tied to the crimes. All had died during night shifts under Saldivar's care. On April 18, 2002, the court sentenced him to 6 consecutive life without parole terms. How did he go undetected for so long? First, most victims were elderly or critically ill, so paperwork easily listed natural causes. And second, succinylcholine breaks down rapidly, while Pavilon can only be detected if the correct tissue is sampled and analyzed with highly sensitive methods, something routine autopsies of that era did not perform. Third, at the time, hospital control over muscle relaxants was far less strict than today. Efren Saldivar is now serving his life without parole sentence at California State Prison. With no chance of release and no public interviews permitted, his prison file remains minimal. In forensic and medical ethics courses, the name Angel of Death is not a title. It is a label for a catastrophic failure paid for in human lives, and a reminder of why both the healthcare and justice systems were forced to change after 2003. Scott Dulesky, Lafayette, California, on the morning of October 15, 2005, in a house deep within the woods of Hunsaker Canyon. 52-year-old Pamela Vitale, wife of criminal defense attorney Daniel Horowitz, stopped answering her phone. When Horowitz returned home, police were called, and the area was sealed off. Within hours, the incident became front-page news across California, a homicide inside a private residence, with evidence suggesting the attacker knew the terrain and struck quickly. A week earlier, an online order for indoor grow lights had been placed using the credit card of a neighbor, Karen Schneider. The person who made the purchase was 16-year-old Scott Dulesky, who lived nearby with his mother and a group of friends interested in indoor plant cultivation. His only mistake was entering the wrong billing address. The package was delivered to the Vitale Horowitz residence. When Schneider noticed the unauthorized charge, investigators believed Dulesky feared exposure and broke in to retrieve the evidence. Detectives recovered a ski mask, gloves, and a pair of athletic shoes near the scene. Forensic testing revealed Dulesky's DNA on the victim's foot, and traces of Vitale's DNA on the mask and gloves. The shoe prints matched the type Dulesky owned, clearly visible on a plastic container lid inside Vitale's home. In his bedroom, police found a handwritten to-do list that included phrases such as disable, erase traces, destroy related items. The trail from the stolen credit card to the misdirected order, to the break-in, to the dual DNA evidence, and finally to the shoe print, formed a complete chain of proof. On October 20th, 2005, Dulesky was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances, the killing committed during a residential burglary. The trial began in August 2006 at the Contra Costa County Superior Court. Prosecutors described the case as a break-in at the wrong house at the wrong time. There were no accomplices, no confession, only forensic evidence, and it was enough. The jury returned a verdict of life without the possibility of parole. Because he was 16 at the time of the offense, Dulesky was spared the death penalty, but his freedom was effectively gone. In 2009, the Court of Appeal upheld the conviction. By 2017, Senate Bill 394 was passed, allowing inmates convicted under 18 to be eligible for parole review after 25 years, even with an LWOP sentence. Dulesky's punishment was converted to 25 to life, making him eligible for parole consideration in 2030. After spending years in facilities including San Quentin and Kern Valley, Dulesky is now serving his sentence at California State Prison, Corcoran. No records indicate violence or disciplinary issues during incarceration. Within Corcoran, he is known by the nickname the Lafayette Kid, a teenager who committed an adult's crime and carries an adult sentence. A single mistake in an online billing address triggered a chain of events that ended with a 25 to life sentence. The Pamela Vitale case remains a textbook example of how forensic science and digital trace technology can map the path of a crime, from one click of a mouse to the steel bars of Corcoran. Mikhail Markasev. Before dawn on January 16, 1997. Along Interstate 405 in the Sepulveda Pass area of Los Angeles, the road was nearly empty. 27-year-old Ennis Cosby, the son of comedian Bill Cosby, pulled his black Mercedes to the shoulder to change a flat tire. His girlfriend, Stephanie Crane, had just arrived and turned on her headlights to help. A man approached, pulled something from his jacket, and shouted, "Open the door!" Crane panicked, backed the car away, and heard a single sharp gunshot echo through the canyon. When she returned, Ennis was lying motionless beside the wheel. The Los Angeles Police Department launched a major investigation, assembling a special task force. Detectives found a .38 caliber revolver and a dark blue knit cap near the scene. There were no usable fingerprints, but several strands of hair were recovered from inside the cap. More than a month later, an anonymous tip reached police. The caller was an acquaintance of the suspect, motivated by a $100,000 reward. The name he gave was Mikhail Markasev, 18 years old, originally from Ukraine, living in the Pasadena area. He had connections to a small group of street youths and often visited a Russian-American apartment complex in Glendale. Investigators collected a hair sample from Markasev, and forensic testing confirmed that the hairs found in the cap matched his genetic profile. Ballistics analysis also determined that the fatal bullet came from the recovered .38 caliber weapon. 3 witnesses, Sarah Peters, Eli Zachariah, and Michael Chang, testified that, in the days following the shooting, Markasev bragged that he had fired on the hill, smirking as he said it. Later, a handwritten letter was seized from jail, in which he described details of the scene, mentioned the gun, the car's position, and used hateful language toward the victim. Though the defense argued the letter was fabricated, the court accepted it as corroborating evidence. In August 1998, the jury convicted Markasev of first-degree murder and armed robbery. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole, plus 10 years. At 19 years old, Markasev began a life sentence with no way out. 3 years later, in February 2001, from his cell at California State Prison, Corcoran, Markasev wrote a letter to California Deputy Attorney General Kyle Brody. "I am guilty. I no longer wish to appeal. I apologize to the Cosby family, and I want to do what is right." The letter stunned prosecutors and the media alike. It was the only formal confession ever sent from within Corcoran, and it closed the case entirely. Since then, Markasev has served his sentence in Corcoran's high-security unit, with no records of violence or complaints. He lives quietly among other notorious inmates, men who neither know nor care that he once drew national attention with a single gunshot in the night. The Ennis Cosby case was not only the tragedy of a famous family, but a lesson in cruel coincidence. A man stops to change a tire, a stranger passes by, and in a few seconds, a decision seals a life sentence inside Corcoran. George Wayne Smith. Afternoon of May 9, 1980, Norco, California. The Security Pacific National Bank branch had just reopened after its lunch break. At exactly 3:40 p.m., 5 armed men stormed inside. They carried an AR-15 an HK-93, a G3, shotguns, homemade explosive devices, and even a long sword. They wore body armor and military-style backpacks. Leading them was 27-year-old George Wayne Smith, a former mechanic obsessed with survivalist and end-of-days literature. He believed society was collapsing, and that this robbery was preparation for Judgment Day. They seized roughly $20,000 before the alarm went off. Riverside County deputies arrived within minutes. In the middle of town, a full-scale gun battle erupted. Police armed with revolvers faced off against men carrying automatic rifles. Bullets ripped through the bank walls and shattered glass everywhere. When cornered, the group jumped into a truck, threw homemade bombs to slow pursuit, and sped toward the highway. The chase stretched more than 25 miles through the Little Creek mountain area. Over 30 patrol cars were hit by gunfire. A police helicopter was also struck and forced to make an emergency landing. When the pursuit reached Little Creek, the group ambushed officers again. Amid the chaos, Deputy James Evans was fatally shot, and 8 other officers were injured. 2 robbers, Belisario and Manuel Delgado, were killed in the final standoff. Smith and the Harvin brothers, Christopher and Russell, were captured after running out of ammunition, surrounded by SWAT units. In the early 1980s, the Riverside County Court held the Norco trial. Prosecutors described Smith as an apocalyptic survivalist who believed violence was the first step toward salvation. The jury found him guilty of 46 felony counts, including murder, armed robbery, assault on law enforcement, and conspiracy to use explosives. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, a ruling that remains unchanged to this day for Smith and his surviving accomplices. But the consequences of Norco went far beyond that courtroom. Before the incident, most California officers were issued only .38 caliber revolvers. After Norco, departments across the state adopted semi-automatic rifles, such as the Mini-14, M16, and AR-15, along with ambush response training, a tactical shift that continues today. The Norco robbery is widely regarded as the beginning of the modern active shooter concept in U.S. police training. The 46 felony convictions ended one of the rare moments when law enforcement and criminals fought each other like 2 military units. The images of burning patrol cars along the highway, a helicopter riddled with bullet holes, and a bank torn apart by gunfire became mandatory study material in police academies nationwide. Today, George Wayne Smith is serving his life without parole sentence at California State Prison, Corcoran. In a rare interview from his cell, he said he once believed he was doing what was right for his faith. But after decades behind bars, he sees only a chain of choices that destroyed many lives. 45 years later, Norco 80 is still remembered as the most violent bank robbery in California's history, where an apocalyptic fantasy turned into a real battlefield and ended behind the steel bars of Corcoran. Bin Tai Look, San Francisco, March 23, 2012. The small home at 16 Houth Street in the quiet Ingleside neighborhood sat tucked among the city's steep hills. That morning, a relative came to visit and found the door unlocked. When police entered, they discovered 5 members of the Lei Chu family deceased. The neighborhood was immediately sealed off, even as residents were heading to work. 2 days later, officers arrested 35-year-old Bin Tai Luke, an acquaintance of the family. Luke had a prior record for armed robbery and assault with a firearm in Santa Clara during the late 1990s, serving nearly 10 years at San Quentin. In 2006, after completing his sentence, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement issued a deportation order, but it could not be carried out because Vietnam had not yet signed a repatriation agreement for immigrants who arrived before 1995. Luke was released back into the community and relocated to the Bay Area. According to investigators, during the night of March 22nd into the early hours of the 23rd, Luke visited the Lei family's home, people he had known through past business dealings. The investigation uncovered a sequence of forensic evidence, DNA traces, movement patterns, and physical items linking him to the scene, forming a complete evidentiary chain. Prosecutors told the court that a hammer was believed to have been used, though no single motive was confirmed. Financial or personal disputes were considered possible. The trial lasted 5 years, generating thousands of pages of testimony and forensic records. On December 11, 2017, the jury found Luke guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted robbery, and 2 counts of burglary, while acquitting him of completed robbery charges. On March 1, 2018, Judge Carol Yagi sentenced him to 5 consecutive life without parole terms, one of the heaviest sentences in San Francisco history. In court, the judge spoke briefly. 5 victims, 5 sentences. Justice can only be complete through permanence. After sentencing, both federal and state immigration agencies reopened the unexecuted deportation order of 2006, calling it a prime example of a legal gap between the United States and Vietnam. In March 2018, Bin Tai Luke was transferred to California State Prison, Corcoran, to begin serving his sentence. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation confirmed his incarceration and reported no significant disciplinary incidents. Among inmates, he is known by the nickname the Man from Houth Street, the man whose crime shook San Francisco and forced immigration officials to reevaluate a policy loophole that had existed for more than a decade. From an unenforced deportation order to 5 consecutive life sentences, the story of Bin Tai Luke is not only the tragedy of one family, but also a case study in how a small administrative gap in federal law can lead to irreversible human loss. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, California State Prison, Corcoran, 2021. Inside the protective housing unit, where inmates requiring extreme security or protection are kept, a 79-year-old man lives quietly, day by day. He was once a police officer, and for 12 years, he terrified the entire state of California. His name, Joseph James DeAngelo, known to the world as the Golden State Killer. The story began in Visalia in 1974, when hundreds of bizarre burglaries plagued the area. The intruder rarely stole money. He ransacked homes, took small personal items, and left chaos behind. Locals called him the Visalia Ransacker. On September 11, 1975, Professor Claude Snelling was shot and killed while trying to stop the intruder from abducting his daughter. Between 1976 and 1979, the attacks moved north toward Sacramento. Residents called him the East Area Rapist. His method was ritualistic. He stalked victims for days, broke in at night, forced the male partner to lie face down, and stacked dishes on his back to detect movement. His pattern of control and cruelty haunted middle-class neighborhoods across California. After DeAngelo was fired from the police force in 1979 for shoplifting, the murders began. He moved south, and investigators began calling him the original Night Stalker. His victims spanned the state: Brian and Katie Maggiore, Sacramento, 1978; Robert Offerman and Deborah Manning, Santa Barbara, December 30th, 1979; Charlene and Lyman Smith, Ventura, 1980; Keith and Patrice Harrington, Dana Point, 1980; Manuela Withun, Irvine, 1981; Cherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez, Goleta, 1981; Janelle Cruz, Irvine, 1986, the final known victim. Then he vanished. Thousands of DNA samples, witness reports, and case files piled up over decades. None led to a match. Until 2018, when a new technology changed everything. Using genetic genealogy and the GED match database, investigators traced a family tree and found a branch leading to former police officer Joseph DeAngelo. Detectives collected DNA from his car door handle and a tissue discarded in his trash. The results were a perfect match to crime scene evidence. On April 24, 2018, DeAngelo was arrested. 2 years later, on June 29, 2020, inside Sacramento State University's auditorium, he pled guilty to 13 counts of murder, 13 counts of kidnapping for robbery, and admitted to 161 additional crimes involving 61 victims. The longest formal confession in California's history. On August 21, 2020, the court sentenced him to 11 life without parole terms, 15 additional life sentences, and 8 extra years. The prosecution stated, "No death sentence could ever deliver justice as swiftly as a lifetime behind bars." On January 26, 2021, DeAngelo was transferred to CSP Corcoran, placed inside the protective housing unit, an isolated facility reserved for inmates who cannot be placed in the general population. Since then, he has spoken to almost no one, taking only short walks in a small exercise yard each day. 45 years after his first known crime, the Golden State Killer's reign of terror ended where California holds its most infamous inmates. Corcoran, a man who once understood the system well enough to hide inside it, now lives confined by it. serving the rest of his life in silence. Michael Jace. On May 19, 2014, at 8:30 at night in Hyde Park, Los Angeles, a family home on Brynhurst Avenue. 2 kids were still inside. Their mother had just come back from what should have been a normal evening. Up to the very last second, nobody wants to believe their own home can turn into the scene of a violent incident. The man in this story is Michael Jace, an actor who once played a police officer in the series The Shield. It is hard not to notice the irony. On camera, he was the one keeping order. In real life that night, he was the one who shattered it inside his own family. His wife wanted a divorce, and Jace was said to be carrying anger, jealousy, and suspicion. For most people, that becomes an argument. When it comes with a gun, it becomes a tragedy. Here is what makes it especially disturbing. According to arguments presented in court, this did not look like a sudden flare-up that faded. It started with something colder, waiting. Jace was said to have waited for his wife to come home with a loaded gun. That means before the back and forth could even end, the next step was already in his hands. And listen to this closely. Jace reportedly told investigators he meant to shoot her in the leg so she would feel pain. This is not a case of I slipped. This is the kind of violence meant to punish, meant to make the other person suffer. Their 2 young sons were in the house at the time. So this did not happen in some invisible darkness. It happened right in front of children, where even a single sentence can become a scar they carry for life. According to testimony later reported, before the next shot, Jace taunted his wife, who liked to run. He said, "You like to run. Why don't you run to heaven?" That one line tells you the attitude, violent and mocking, like he wanted to stamp "I'm in control" onto someone else's fear. After that, Jace contacted his father-in-law, admitted he had shot April, and asked him to come pick up the 2 children. In the end, a jury convicted Jace of second-degree murder, and the court sentenced him to 40 years to life. In the year 2020, he was transferred to Corcoran within the California prison system. The scariest part is not that he was once famous. It is the straight line of behavior. Waiting, punishing, doing it with the kids right there, then calmly stepping into cleanup mode. In one evening, a family was torn apart in a way no child should ever have to see. Phil Spector. On February 3, 2003, around 5 in the morning, in Alhambra, Los Angeles County. The front door of the home Phil Spector liked to call his castle was slightly open. Police stepped into the foyer, right near the entrance, and found Lana Clarkson, deceased. Lana was 40 years old. She was an actress, and that night she was working as a hostess at the Foundation Room, the VIP area inside the House of Blues on the Sunset Strip. On the night of February 2nd, she met Spector there, a famous music producer, the kind of man used to being catered to, and used to hearing yes. Lana was the one expected to keep the smile in place, say the polite line at the right time, and get VIP guests through the night without trouble. Around 2:20 in the morning, Clarkson left the House of Blues and got into a car with Spector. Some accounts say she only expected a ride to where her own car was parked, but the car did not stop at the lot. It drove straight to Alhambra. Around 3 in the morning, they went inside. The door closed. Then it went quiet. And close to 5 in the morning, the driver, Adriano de Souza, said he heard a loud bang from inside. Minutes later, according to witness accounts, Spector stepped outside holding a gun and said, "I think I just killed someone." Police went in and found Clarkson in the foyer, near the front door, with a fatal gunshot injury. That detail, right at the door, is what haunts people. It makes you wonder if, in her final moments, she was trying to get out of that situation. After that, 2 stories collided. Spector publicly pushed the idea that he did not shoot her. In an interview with Esquire magazine in July of 2003, he said Clarkson kissed the gun. In plain English, he claimed it was something she did herself, a bizarre accident. Prosecutors said the opposite. They presented testimony about earlier incidents where Spector allegedly pulled a gun or pointed a gun to pressure women to stay when they wanted to leave. Put that pattern into the Alhambra house, put it at the doorway, and the shot no longer looks like a sudden freak accident. It looks like a situation pushed to a breaking point. The 2007 trial ended with a hung jury. At the retrial, on April 13, 2009, Spector was convicted of second-degree murder. On May 29, 2009, he was sentenced to 19 years to life, and in June of 2009, he was transferred to Corcoran. And if this story needs an ending that feels right, it does not belong to the word legend, and it belongs to the person who never made it out that door. Behind the court dates is a family living with a permanent absence. If you remember one thing after this story, remember her name: Lana Clarkson, Paul Flores. On May 25, 1996, in the early morning hours, at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, the grass outside the dorms was still wet with dew. A 19-year-old student named Kristen Smart was unsteady after an off-campus party. Two students saw she was not okay, so they walked with her, just to make sure she did not fall on the way back. And then, Paul Flores showed up. Listen closely. This is the moment everything shifts. According to testimony in court, Flores inserted himself into the group and said, in effect, that he knew where Kristen lived and he would take her back to her dorm. The other two looked at the situation and thought, more help means she gets there faster, and they split off. Flores kept going, alone, with Kristen. That was the last time Kristen Smart was seen. And this is the part that drove her family to the edge. There was no hallway footage, no witness who saw a specific door close. Just one night, and by morning, Kristen had vanished from the world like someone hit delete. Prosecutors later laid out a direct theory. They said Flores walked Kristen back to the dorm area, then tried to force her into a sexual assault, and during that sequence, she never came back. Because the allegation involved an attempted sexual assault, the case was charged as first-degree murder under a felony murder theory. In other words, prosecutors did not treat this like an accident. They described it as someone seizing a moment, targeting a person who was not in a condition to protect herself. Kristen's body was never found. There was no proper funeral, no grave where her family could place flowers and say, "You are home." From the early investigation, police dogs were reported to have alerted in an area connected to Flores' dorm room and bed. That is not a case-closing answer by itself, but it was an early sign the story was heading somewhere dark. Second, years later, investigators found signs beneath the wooden deck at Flores' father's home. Prosecutors argued it was a place where Kristen had been buried temporarily and then moved. In the year 2022, a jury convicted Flores. In the year 2023, the court sentenced him to 25 years to life. And on June 6, 2024, Flores was transferred to Corcoran. The worst part is not only that Kristen disappeared, it is how it happened. Someone stepped in at the exact moment she was weakest, offered, "I'll walk you back," and she never returned. For the Smart family, the cruelty did not end that night. It stretched into years of silence, missing answers, and no ending they could truly close. Sirhan Sirhan. On June 5, 1968, in the early morning hours, at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, Robert F. Kennedy had just spoken after a primary election win. People were packed into a narrow passage leading through the kitchen area. Reporters, hotel staff, supporters, security. The atmosphere felt like a celebration squeezed through a funnel, crowded, hot, and hard to breathe. And right then, Sirhan Sirhan stepped forward. Sirhan brought a small revolver, moved in close, and fired multiple times. Kennedy was shot. And in a hallway that tight, the harm did not stop with the main target. 5 other people nearby were also hit and injured. As people rushed in to restrain him, the hotel dropped into chaos. Seconds earlier, it was cheering. Seconds later, it was screaming and running. Kennedy was taken for emergency care, but he died on June 6, 1968. And the country lost another symbol in a decade already shaken again and again by political violence. Here is a detail that chills people because it points to preparation. Years later, accounts noted that Sirhan's notebook included a line along the lines of, "Kennedy must be assassinated before June 5, 1968. This did not read like a feeling that flared up and vanished. It read like an appointment written down, like a task to be completed. The motive most often cited in official records and mainstream reporting is political. Sirhan was said to be angry about RFK's pro-Israel stance after the 1967 war. But in plain terms, whatever the reason, bringing a gun into a crowded hallway is not an ideal. It is a deliberate choice that creates death and panic. A court convicted him of murder, along with additional convictions tied to the 5 other people wounded in that narrow corridor. His death sentence was later changed to life with the possibility of parole. It may sound like a door, but his parole efforts have been denied again and again. In the year 1992, he was transferred to Corcoran, and that is the end of the timeline. A few seconds of pulling a trigger in a tight hallway, a presidential candidate who never walks out, and people standing nearby who live with it for the rest of their lives. John Albert Gardner III. On February 25, 2010, in Poway, California, on the trails around Lake Hodges, it was a normal afternoon run. Chelsea King, a teenage girl, headed out on the trail like so many people do. Then, she vanished from the very place the community had always treated as safe. In the days that followed, Poway felt stretched tight. Her family posted photos, neighbors searched, police worked every turn and junction. People wanted to believe it was a wrong turn, a dead phone, a misunderstanding, anything. But when Chelsea's belongings were found near the trail, that hope changed fast. On February 28, 2010, police arrested John Albert Gardner III. What brought him into the light was DNA evidence found on Chelsea's belongings. Not a guess, not a rumor, something concrete. On March 2, 2010, Chelsea was found in a shallow grave near the lake. You don't need more detail than that to understand what it means. Someone did not only cause a death, someone tried to turn a person into something that could be hidden away. But Gardner was not the kind of person who came out of nowhere. Back in December of 2009, a jogger named Candice Moncayo was attacked on her route, and she survived because she fought back hard. And even before that, Gardner had a serious record tied to sexual offenses. He had been in prison, then released. Rewind one more year, and you hit the name Amber Dubois, also a teenager. On February 13, 2009, Amber disappeared on her way to school in Escondido. According to what Gardner later admitted, he pulled up in a vehicle, threatened her, forced her into the car, and took her away from a busy area. This was not a chance encounter. It was a fast abduction, aimed at the split second when a person cannot react in time. On April 16, 2010, Gardner pleaded guilty in the 2 homicide cases and the jogger attack. In May of 2010, the court handed down sentences meant to keep him locked away for life, and in June of 2010, Gardner was transferred to Corcoran. A lot of people hear that and say, so it is over. But for the families of Chelsea and Amber, there is no over. What stays with them is the thought that never stops. What if someone had stopped him one step earlier? Carrie Stainer. On February 15, 1999, at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, right near the entrance to Yosemite, 3 travelers went to sleep in a motel room. By morning, the room was empty. Carol Sund, her teenage daughter Julie, and Silvina Peloso were gone, as if they had never been there. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken door, no obvious struggle. That caught investigators immediately. The door had been opened from the inside. Someone got in without raising suspicion. Someone had a reason to be there. Carrie Stainer worked maintenance at the Cedar Lodge. He had keys. He had a reason to knock. He had access to move through that part of the property while guests were asleep. And according to investigative records, this was not impulsive. He chose the timing, chose the victims, and chose an approach that left them no real chance to react. The search spread across Yosemite. Vast forest, long roads, rivers, and side trails that branch in every direction. Then a lead appeared in a way that looked calculated. A rental car was found burned far from the lodge, burned to erase traces, but also to pull the search away from the real focus. And while the system chased that vehicle trail, something else was delivered. A hand-drawn map. It pointed to where Julie would be found. Not out of remorse, not to help. Prosecutors argued it was Stainer keeping control, not only over the victims, but over the manhunt itself. He decided when the truth would surface, and how much of it people would be allowed to see. Then on July 21, 1999, in Yosemite, Joey Armstrong, a 26-year-old park employee, disappeared. This time, investigators did not treat it as a one-off. It looked like a pattern. The victims were women. The setting was familiar to the offender, and the behavior showed clear escalation, not hidden, but done in a way meant to leave fear behind. Just days later, on July 24, 1999, Carrie Stainer was arrested. In questioning, he did not deny it. He did not panic. According to the record, he admitted involvement in 4 deaths. By late 2002, a California court sentenced Stainer to death in the Cedar Lodge case involving the 3 travelers. He was sent to San Quentin. Later, through maximum security housing assignments, he was transferred to Corcoran. A sentence can lock up one person. It cannot lock up the moment 4 families were split in 2. Carol, Julissa, Silvina, Joa, they came to Yosemite to rest. They left in a way no one should ever have to leave. And the bitter truth is this: the offender was not some ghost in the woods. He was someone who could pass you every day, with keys in his hand. Gerald Parker. On September 30th, 1979, in Tustin, California. A small apartment, dim inside, the front door left unlocked. Diana Green, 20 years old and close to giving birth, was home waiting for her husband to return from running errands. The television was on, the lights were on, and there was one thing no one could see: a man outside the door, staring at a lock that was never latched. He walked in without needing to break anything. When police arrived, what they saw reflected a very specific kind of violence. Diana had been struck repeatedly in the head with a hard object, with enough force to leave her in a deep coma, heavy enough that doctors had to be blunt with the family. The pregnancy could not be saved. Diana survived, but her memory was shattered. The question, who came into the home, was missing from the mind of the person who needed it most. Then the cruelest twist followed. Her husband, Kevin Green, became the person blamed for all of it. Neighbors had heard the couple arguing earlier. Investigators looked at timing and relationship, and that was enough to build a story. The husband lost control, attacked her, then pretended to discover her. Kevin was convicted. He spent nearly 2 decades in prison for a night he did not cause. Meanwhile, Gerald Parker was still out there, and Diana was not the first. Before and after that night, in Anaheim, Costa Mesa, Tustin, the same pattern kept showing up. Women alone in their bedrooms, doors left unlocked, then struck again and again in the head with a wooden club, a hammer, or whatever Parker grabbed. Many did not survive. Some lived, but woke up in a body that no longer worked the same, with their final minutes gone. He was not there to steal. He did not talk. He did not demand money. He did not search the place like a burglar. What he took was total control inside someone else's private room. The bedroom door, the last boundary people think of as safe, was, to him, no thicker than glass. Eventually, Parker did go to prison, but not because of the Bedroom Basher series. He was arrested for attacking a teenage boy, and then caused more violence behind bars by striking another inmate with a metal bar. Because of how violent he was transferred to Corcoran State Prison, where California holds many of its most dangerous offenders. At that point, no one on the outside knew he was the one who had turned so many bedrooms into crime scenes. By the mid-1990s, county DNA labs began reopening older cases. A sample from a Bedroom Basher scene was run through the system, and it matched Gerald Parker, who was already sitting in Corcoran. Overnight, he went from being just another violent inmate on paper to the key suspect in 6 homicides and a wrongful conviction that had lasted nearly 17 years. During questioning, Parker admitted case after case, not with shock, but almost like he was reading off a checklist that had already been completed. Kevin Green was freed, walking out of prison with a life that had been nearly broken in half. People called him the Bedroom Basher because it was easy to remember. The families did not remember him by a nickname. They remembered the moment a bedroom door opened and a loved one was taken from them. And the bitter part is this: he sat inside Corcoran for a long time until one tiny DNA sample finally pulled him into the light. Joe Pegleg Morgan, in the year 1946, in the Malibu Hills of California. A hastily dug hole, a body quickly hidden, and the person responsible was only 16 years old at the time. Joe Pegleg Morgan. Listen carefully. At 16, he had already chosen a way of solving problems that meant beating someone until they could no longer resist, then burying them shallowly, like disposing of something broken. The weapon was a tire iron. There is no need for graphic detail. You can already picture the force involved. What is frightening here is not only the death, but the mindset cold enough to take the next step, hiding the body. He was convicted and sent to San Quentin. After his release, life should have taken a different turn. It did not. In 1956, he resurfaced in a bank robbery in West Covina, armed, taking cash. This was not someone who made one mistake. This was someone who treated other people's fear as a tool. The more panic, the easier it was to control the situation. Then in 1961, while being brought back to county custody as a witness, he did something reckless and dirty. He organized an escape for 11 inmates, and the prosthetic leg was not just a colorful detail. It proved something. To him, prison was not a place for reflection. It was just a problem to solve. He hid tools. He pulled others into it, and the fallout landed on society. But Pegleg Morgan became truly dangerous when he became involved with the Mexican mafia, La M. At that point, violence stopped being isolated incidents. It became a system. Morgan did not need to be on the street himself. He gave orders, picked targets, and sent others to do the dirty work. In one case, records describe him arranging a killing with the cold efficiency of a delivery plan, a photo of the target, a set of keys, a firearm. Everything prepared. This is the cruelty of someone at the top. He turned human lives into tasks, turned other people into instruments, and sat back as if he were simply managing operations. At the end of his life, the most stripped-down truth arrived. Someone who lived by violence still ends up in a hospital bed. On October 4th, 1993, Morgan was transferred from Pelican Bay to the medical unit at Corcoran. A few weeks later, doctors confirmed it was too late. On November 8th, 1993, he died in his sleep. No gunfire, no legend, just the end of someone who left behind too many consequences. If there is anything that could be called Pegleg Morgan's legacy, it is a list of outcomes. People dead, families broken, and a criminal system fed by fear. Rodney Alcala. On September 13th, 1978, on the set of The Dating Game in Los Angeles, the lights were on, the audience laughed, and Rodney Alcala sat there speaking smoothly, like a man who was a little odd but charming. He even won. But the woman who chose him later canceled the date, saying he felt creepy. Instinct is not superstition. Sometimes it is a fire alarm. On July 24th, 1979, in Orange County, California, police put handcuffs on Alcala. He looked like he had just stepped out of a photo shoot, calm, with an expression that said, people were overreacting. But it was not just his wrists that were locked. What was shut down was the game he had been playing for years, using politeness to open doors of trust, then turning that trust into a trap. Alcala did not rush in like a robber. He approached in a way that looked legitimate. He posed as a photographer, offered photo sessions, told people they looked good on camera, hinted at modeling opportunities. It sounded harmless, and that is exactly why it was dangerous. His violence often began with a sentence that sounded like small talk. Then came the next step, isolation. All he needed was to pull someone out of a safe space for a few minutes, a little farther down a path, into a car, into an enclosed room. From that moment on, control shifted. And the cruelty here is this. He did not need noise. He only needed control at the right moment. The case that led to his arrest involved a teenager named Robin Samso, who disappeared and was later found deceased. There is no need to describe more. The impact is enough. After that case, people looked at friendly strangers differently, because some predators do not attack right away. They make you trust them first. And Robin was not the only name. In the year 2010, a jury found Alcala responsible for the deaths of 4 more women in California: Charlotte Lamb, Jill Barcombe, Georgia Wickstead, and Jill Parento, and sentenced him to death. Later, in New York, he pleaded guilty to the killings of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover. 6 names, 6 lives, all connected by a man who used a camera and words as bait. Speaking of the camera, years later, police released some of Alcala's photographs, hundreds of faces, because they believed some of the people in those images may have encountered him, and some may have disappeared without ever being properly identified. His camera was not just a prop. It was a way of marking people. In court, he showed another kind of cruelty. He tried to turn the trial into a stage. He represented himself, argued, delayed, as if the pain of the victims' families was something to play with. There was nothing clever about it, just emptiness. In September of 2016, Alcala was transferred to Corcoran, to the medical unit. On July 24, 2021, he died while still in custody. Juan Corona, on May 19, 1971, in Sutter County, California. A peach orchard owner walked along the rows and noticed a patch of soil that looked wrong, freshly disturbed in a careless way, not the kind of settling that happens naturally, the kind that suggests someone tried to make it look normal, but rushed. He called the police. They dug. And in that moment, the quiet farming area changed tone completely. Beneath the soil was not roots or debris. It was a person. Then, one grave became many. Over the next 2 weeks, investigators uncovered 25 bodies buried across orchards near the Feather River, around the Yuba City and Marysville area. This was not a single incident. It was a series. And the coldest part was the victims. Most were male farm laborers, day workers, men who moved often and left little trace. Choosing them meant choosing people most likely to disappear without notice. The name Juan Corona surfaced not because he drew attention to himself, but because he was someone you had to deal with if you wanted work. He recruited laborers, placed them on jobs, promised pay. To people just trying to earn enough to get through the week, he looked like a doorway. In this story, that doorway led straight into a trap. The investigation did not rely on rumor. It rested on something simple and undeniable: paperwork bearing Corona's name. In several shallow graves, police found scraps of paper, receipts, bank slips, with his information on them. It was a trace both careless and cruel, as if he never expected anyone to dig, or no longer saw what was buried as human. Then another piece locked the case in place: a notebook, names, dates, entries that made it clear this was not a burst of rage. It looked like a work schedule, turning human lives into items to be handled. Corona was arrested on May 26, 1971. What followed was another kind of cruelty: the courtroom. No soil, no orchards, just families forced to sit and hear their loved ones reduced to evidence, many of them from vulnerable communities, with little documentation and few people to speak for them. In 1973, Corona was convicted of 25 counts of first-degree murder. The conviction was overturned. He was retried, and in 1982 he was convicted again and sentenced to 25 life terms. In 1992, he was transferred to protective custody at Corcoran. On March 4, 2019, Juan Corona died while still incarcerated at Corcoran. 25 men left home to work. They never came back, and it took an orchard being torn open for the truth to surface. Someone had turned their need to survive into a trap. A community lost 25 lives, and their families were left to spend the rest of their days learning how to live with that absence. Ricardo Medina Jr. At about 10 at night on January 31, 2015, deputies responded to an emergency call from a remote home in the Green Valley area near Palmdale, California. The caller reported that someone inside was seriously hurt. When officers entered the house, they found only two people inside. Joshua Sutter was lying on the floor, and Ricardo Medina Jr., an actor who once played the Red Ranger in Power Rangers Wild Force, was standing nearby. In Medina's hands was a large metal sword, styled after Conan the Barbarian. It had a straight, heavy blade often seen in fantasy films. It was not a prop and not a plastic decoration. It was a real weapon that could cause a fatal injury at close range. Joshua Sutter was not a stranger. He was the brother of Rachel Kennedy, the property owner who had allowed Medina to stay at the animal rescue ranch she managed. At first, bringing Medina there was seen as a chance for him to step away from his old life and restart in a quiet environment. Over time, his presence became a growing source of tension. Kennedy told investigators that Medina became increasingly difficult to manage. He grew irritable, resisted house rules, and argued often about shared living space. These were not small disagreements. They built up and turned into ongoing conflict inside the home. Fearing for her safety, Kennedy asked Joshua to move in. He helped with the ranch work and made her feel safer. But his arrival caused the tension between him and Medina to escalate quickly. Their arguments became more direct and more intense. On that night, a major confrontation broke out. Medina told deputies that he and his girlfriend went into the bedroom and locked the door because they believed Joshua was losing control. According to his statement, Joshua forced his way toward the room, and Medina panicked, then swung the sword in self-defense. However, according to investigators, the scene did not match that account. They found no sign that the door had been forced open. There were no signs of unlawful entry. The position of the objects in the room and the condition of the victim suggested that this was not a sudden defensive reaction. It appeared to be an action carried out at very close range with a weapon capable of causing an immediate fatal injury. Joshua Sutter was rushed for medical treatment, but he lost his life due to the severity of the wound. In one night, one man died, and another man, once just a guest on the property, became the primary suspect in a homicide case. The next day, Ricardo Medina Jr. was taken into custody. Due to missing legal elements at that early stage, he was released while the investigation continued. Nearly 1 year later, in January 2016, officers arrested him again. This time he was charged with homicide. Facing the possibility of a lengthy sentence, Medina agreed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which is causing another person's death without proof of premeditation. In March 2017, the judge sentenced him to 6 years in state prison, which was the maximum for that charge in California. The sentence immediately sparked debate. Joshua Sutter's family said the punishment was far too light for the loss they suffered. Many in the public were stunned that the name Ricardo Medina Jr., once tied to a children's television hero, now appeared in a California criminal case. After the sentencing, Medina entered the prison system. According to custody records, his name appeared among inmates who were transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, a maximum security facility built for individuals considered difficult to control and at high risk for violence. There were no stage lights, no cameras, no audience. From that point forward, Medina's life remained behind concrete walls and high steel fences. From a familiar face on screen, he became another name inside the California correction system, and one of the many people who passed through the gates of Pelican Bay. This story is not a fictional script. It is the result of unresolved conflict, a moment that went beyond control, and an action that ended another person's life forever. Lloyd Avery II. At about 4 in the afternoon on July 1st, 1999, in the Santa Barbara Plaza area between the neighborhood known as the Jungle in Baldwin Village in South Los Angeles, 2 people were resting under a tree when a man walked toward them. That man was Lloyd Avery II, an actor who had appeared in the film Boys in the Hood. But at that moment, there was no roll and no camera. There was only the reality of the street. The conversation turned into an argument almost immediately. According to court records, Avery believed the couple in front of him were tied to a drug debt in territory controlled by the Bloods, where he was trying to assert himself cheap. There was no sign that this was a warning meant to intimidate. Avery pulled out a handgun and fired at Annette Lewis at very close range. Moments later, he pointed the weapon at Percy Branch and fired again, aiming directly at them. Annette Lewis lost her life that day. Percy Branch survived for a short time before passing away from complications related to the wound. In broad daylight, in a crowded residential area, a double fatal attack unfolded in front of the community. The incident shocked residents even more because the shooter was the same person who had acted in the scene where Ricky is shot in Boys in the Hood. On film, it was only a performance. In real life, Avery had fired at real people on a real street. There were no cut scenes and no chance for a retake. After the incident, Avery did not disappear immediately. He continued to appear around Los Angeles for a short period and even took a few small roles. But the name Lloyd Avery II was no longer tied to acting. It was tied to gun violence and to the 2 deaths at the Jungle. On December 8, 1999, Los Angeles officers arrested Avery near his grandmother's home in the Beverly Hills area after a short pursuit. Nearly 1 year later, he went to trial on first-degree homicide charges. The jury found that Avery caused the death of Annette Lewis and was responsible for the fatal outcome involving Percy Branch. The sentence for Avery was life in prison, without the possibility of early release. From a face once seen on the big screen, he officially became a violent offender in the California prison system. Avery was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility in Crescent City that holds inmates considered at high risk for violence and difficult to manage. It is a place where even a small mistake in supervision can lead to deadly consequences. Inside the prison, Lloyd Avery II changed his image completely. He carried a Bible, spoke often about religion, and some inmates called him Baby Jesus. Avery believed he had a spiritual mission behind the concrete walls and steel bars. In 2005, the prison administration housed Avery with Kevin Roby, an inmate with a severe history of violence and an extreme belief system that clashed entirely with Avery's. 2 men with opposing worldviews were locked together in a small space inside one of the toughest prisons in the United States. There were no cameras to record what happened inside that cell. When staff checked the room, Lloyd Avery II was found deceased. Forensic findings indicated he died after a violent attack that caused asphyxiation and significant trauma. Avery's death triggered strong criticism of the management at Pelican Bay. People questioned why 2 inmates with such a high potential for conflict were placed together and why it took hours to discover a death inside a maximum security unit. Lloyd Avery II, the man who once shot Ricky on screen and later fired at real people on the streets, ended his life inside Pelican Bay. There was no redemption arc and no return. All that remained was a death file in the California prison system and a name tied to violence both in the movies and in the real world. Dameshlo Green. At 4:28 in the morning on May 14, 2014, The 911 center in Sacramento received an emergency call from a home in South Sacramento near Florian Road and 24th Street. The caller was panicked and said someone had been shot inside the house. When officers and medics arrived, they confirmed that 31-year-old Tamisha Ridge was found deceased in the downstairs bedroom. Inside the same home, her 3 young children were still asleep upstairs. A family member was lying in the living room. Her current boyfriend, Lee Williams, was still in the bedroom next to the place where Tamisha had just been fatally wounded. There was no sign of forced entry. No items were disturbed. There was no indication of a robbery. The only person targeted was Tamisha. Just hours before the fatal incident, Demeshlo Green, Tamisha's former boyfriend, had flown from Texas to Sacramento. In the days leading up to the attack, he had repeatedly called and sent messages, putting intense emotional pressure on her. He begged her to reconcile and threatened consequences if she refused. That evening, Tamisha stopped responding. According to court records, early on the morning of May 14th, Green went to Tamisha's home. The door was unlocked. He carried a shortened shotgun, a type of weapon considered extremely dangerous in a confined space and at close range. He did not wander through the house. He did not look for anything. He walked straight to the bedroom. In the dark room, Tamisha was still lying on the bed. Lee Williams woke up when he realized someone was standing there. A brief struggle unfolded in only a few seconds. Moments later, Green fired the weapon at very close range next to the bed. Tamisha Ridge lost her life instantly. She had no chance to resist, no chance to escape, no chance to defend herself. That single shot ended the life of a mother of 3, a woman raising her children on her own, and a YouTube creator with hundreds of thousands of followers who had built her fashion brand from a young age. After the attack, Green left the house. But instead of fleeing farther, about 5 hours later, he appeared at the county jail on a probation violation. Officers detained him there and quickly identified him as the primary suspect. Investigators then reviewed Green's past. This was not his first act of violence. He had a long history of assaults on women, multiple court cases involving domestic abuse and sexual misconduct, and a prior sentence for attacking an earlier girlfriend. Tamisha was not the first person he harmed, but she was the one who paid with her life. The first trial in 2016 ended without a verdict because jurors could not agree on who pulled the trigger in the final moment. Green insisted it was an accident. Prosecutors presented a clear sequence of events. He flew from Texas, carried a firearm, went to the victim's home in the middle of the night, and walked straight into her bedroom. In the second trial in 2018, the jury concluded that Demeshlo Green was guilty of first-degree homicide with a firearm enhancement. The judge sentenced him to 75 years to life, a punishment that effectively meant he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Green entered the high-security prison system of California, ultimately sent to Pelican Bay State Prison, a facility built for inmates considered extremely dangerous. This is not a place for leniency. With his repeated violence and his overwhelming sentence, the only path left for him is to live out his remaining years behind bars. There was no apology, no second chance, only a final record stating that Demeshlo Green caused the death of Tamisha Ridge in her own home while her children slept upstairs. Today, he is held inside one of the toughest prisons in the United States. And that is why his name appears on the list of the most violent inmates ever connected to Pelican Bay. Number 2. Kevin Roby. On January 31st, 1987, at a home in South Los Angeles, Kevin Roby called police with a voice that sounded panicked. He claimed that his sister, Velma Lynn Hill, had just been taken by 3 men dressed like Japanese ninjas. Roby described the scene in detail, speaking as a helpless witness who saw intruders escape and portraying himself as the only survivor. But when officers asked Roby to walk them through the scene, the ninja story fell apart immediately. Inside the house, they found Velma Lynn's body in a trash container, covered with dog food. There was no team of masked men. There was no abduction. Velma Lynn had been sexually assaulted and lost her life due to signs consistent with asphyxiation. According to investigators, the person responsible was her own brother. The investigation revealed another truth. Velma Lynn was not the only victim in the family. Roby had previously assaulted another sister. These actions were not a sudden outburst. They showed a long-running pattern of violence inside his own household. In 1988, a court sentenced Kevin Roby to life in prison without the possibility of parole for homicide and sexual assault. From someone who once studied at the United States Air Force Academy, he became one of California's most dangerous offenders. Due to the severity of his crimes and his volatility, Roby was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility in Crescent City that houses inmates considered impossible to manage through ordinary means. At Pelican Bay, Roby did not remain just another prisoner. He began creating a new identity for himself. Roby called himself the Satanic Christ, describing his role as a dark counterpart to traditional religion. In letters and handwritten notes, he wrote about rituals, missions, and the idea that another person's death could serve his message. This was violence wrapped inside an extreme belief system. In 2005, Pelican Bay staff assigned Roby to share a cell with Lloyd Avery II, another inmate who had once appeared in the movie Boys in the Hood before his conviction. Unlike Roby, Avery had become deeply religious in prison, carried a Bible, and often tried to persuade others to turn away from violence. Two men with opposite worldviews were locked together inside a small cell within a maximum security unit. On September 4, 2005, their conflict crossed a deadly line. Inside the cell at Pelican Bay, Kevin Roby attacked and killed Lloyd Avery II. Avery died in the cell from trauma and asphyxiation after the assault. The incident became one of the most notorious scandals in Pelican Bay's history, not only because of the death itself, but because of the way it went undetected. For nearly 38 hours, Avery's body remained inside the cell without being discovered. During multiple head counts, Roby positioned the body in ways that made staff believe Avery was still alive. When an officer finally entered the cell for a direct check, the truth was fully exposed. The room had been turned into the scene of what Roby described as a ritual. He had drawn distorted religious symbols on the walls and floor, making Avery's death part of the ideology he practiced. Lloyd Avery's family pushed for Roby to face a new trial for the killing inside the prison. But because Roby already carried a sentence of life without parole, prosecutors declined to pursue additional charges, stating there was no further penalty available. Roby's violence did not end at Pelican Bay. Nearly 40 years after killing his sister, in 2024 at the California Institution for Men in Chino, Roby attacked a correctional officer with a makeshift weapon, injuring the staff member. Even at an older age, after spending most of his life behind bars, Roby continued to pose a serious danger to anyone near him. Within the record of Kevin Roby, there are at least 3 categories of victims: family members, a cellmate at Pelican Bay, and correctional staff. His violence did not happen in a moment. It spanned decades. And inside Pelican Bay State Prison, a facility built to contain the most dangerous individuals, Roby not only continued that violence, but added another death within walls designed to prevent it. There was no redemption, no return. Only a name recorded in the California corrections system, and a long chain of actions that made Kevin Roby one of the most violent, dangerous, and unmanageable inmates ever held at Pelican Bay. Roy Norris. On the night of June 24, 1979, along a coastal road in Southern California, a young woman stood by the shoulder holding a hitchhiking sign. A white GMC van with no side windows slowed to a stop. Inside were 2 men, Roy Norris and Lawrence Bittaker. From the moment the sliding door closed, it was no longer a ride. It was the beginning of one of the most violent crime sprees in California history. That van was not a normal vehicle. It had been turned into a moving space of captivity where all control belonged to the 2 men in the front seats. There were no witnesses, no escape routes, and no chance for anyone outside to hear what was happening inside. But what took place during the summer and fall of that year was not a sudden act carried out in a moment of rage. It was prepared long before. Before the van ever appeared on the road, Norris and Bittaker met inside a California state prison. In the yard, behind razor wire and under the watch of officers, they did not talk about starting over. They talked about abducting young women. They talked about leaving no witnesses. They talked about the sense of power that came from another person's fear. And when they were released, they remembered every part of those conversations. From June through October of 1979, Norris and Bittaker traveled along coastal highways, beaches, and the San Gabriel Mountains. They targeted girls between 13 and 18 who were alone, and believed they were meeting two ordinary men. 5 victims lost their lives. 2 bodies have never been recovered. The final victim, taken on Halloween night in 1979, was found the next morning on a front lawn in a quiet suburb. Not in a remote forest, not in the desert, but in a place where people walk their dogs every morning. During the investigation, detectives discovered an audio tape that captured what happened inside the van. Those recordings were later described as some of the most disturbing evidence in American investigative history. At the same time, police located another victim who had survived and could describe the van and the 2 men. That lead brought detectives to the homes of Norris and Bittaker. Inside, police found more than 500 Polaroid photographs of young women, including several who had died or were missing, along with tools used for restraint. The white van, the center of everything, was also seized. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, Roy Norris chose to cooperate with investigators. He admitted his role in the crimes to avoid execution and testified against Lawrence Bittaker. In 1980, Norris received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after several decades, a possibility that never came to pass. For many years, Roy Norris remained in the California prison system. In the late 1990s, he was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, the maximum security facility built for inmates considered extremely dangerous and difficult to control. His presence there showed the level of risk attached to his file, even though Pelican Bay was not his long-term placement. Norris was later moved to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. Reports from that time noted that he showed no signs of genuine remorse. Every request for parole was denied. He was eventually transferred to the prison hospital at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he died in 2020, ending the life of one of the most violent serial offenders California ever held. Today, Roy Norris's record is no longer a headline. It is thousands of pages of investigative files, photographs, audio tapes, and statements from the survivors. And when Pelican Bay is discussed, his name remains an example of why maximum security prisons are not built for people who simply made a mistake. They are built for those whose violence has become a part of how they exist. Roy Norris was not just a killer. He was one of the reasons so many steel doors had to be built, and one of the reasons they will never open again.